Hi, I'm Michael Regina, host of Read the Freaking Comics. You can find me on YouTube or on Blue Sky, and you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a fellow host of his own show called Read the Frickin' Comics, which is a great title, by the way. I love it. We're joined by the ever-talented host of this amazing show, Michael Regina. How are you doing today?
Very good, Kurt. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Love the channel, love the concept. You're going into research, you're diving into single issue comics, which I think is an underutilized medium when it comes to comics because everyone focuses on the big two and all of that other fun stuff. But you have a broad range of amazing single issue comics you talk about here. I'm getting ahead of myself as I do. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Absolutely. So, hi, my name is Michael Regina, and I'm the host of Read the Freaking Comics. Dive into single issue comics. I do the research. I try to find and contact the artists and creative team behind the comic that I'm diving into. And I even look into the advertising, the scope of comics at that time, with that era, whatever comic it brings. And I try to tie that all together into a nice little package that you can enjoy on YouTube.
And I just love the fact that you have great research. You go in depth into these things. The fact that you actively try to find the artists and the creative team around these comics is wonderful to see as well. Because especially with the aging population of a lot of these comic artists and creators, their stories are going to be lost, and it's good that you're kind of trying to reach out and find them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when I get feedback when do a reach out and then somebody says, "Yeah, sure, I haven't talked about that comic in forever," or "Oh my God, I never get asked to do interviews," that kind of thing, which is great because some of these guys are unsung heroes. Some of these guys were only in comics for a short period of time. They're like, "Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd love to talk about it. I'd love to give you some insights." Some of them have even told me that because I've asked them to dive into a specific issue, they had to go back, look at all their old work, and they said, "I've just been reminiscing all afternoon. I love this so much." So it's a lot of fun.
If you had to reverse engineer the success of a single comic issue that you believe is a masterpiece, what are the key elements, art, writing, pacing, etc., that make it stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the perfect single issue comic should be a story within itself that tells a larger part of an overarching story, but is a self-contained issue as well. Our heroes should always come across as heroic wherever they are on that spectrum of a superhero, but they should always have a challenge that they overcome. They should always try to strive to be the best as they could possibly be in any given situation. Some comics are extremely introspective, some are just action packed, but I do feel they all need that element. Otherwise, they are sort of in a vacuum, don't really tell much of a story. And I come across those as well, right? So it's not just a love story where I'm gushing over every single issue. There are some issues where I say, you know what, the story is kind of lacking. There needs to be more meat on the bones here. And I do it with love because I try to stay positive in every aspect of my storytelling. But yeah, I think the perfect comic does need to have its own beginning, middle, and end, even in those 20, 22 pages that they are in those single issues. Yeah, that's kind of the perfect mix of what makes a great comic.
Obviously, the style of comics has changed over the decades, and the style of writing, art, the professionalism of the comic scene has vastly improved from its humble beginnings. Is there a certain artist and writer team that just have withstood the test of time when it came to single issue comics?
I think there's a large mix. I think when you look back at the runs by John Byrne, artists like Todd McFarlane, who I love, Sal Buscema, who I love, there are runs. Denny O'Neil. Sorry, now my mind is just going on all the people that I absolutely love their runs. There's certain people that really really worked well together that actively tried to stay together as a team, whether they jumped between titles or jumped between publishers. I think those are some of the best runs. I think of Danny O'Neil on Batman. I think of John Byrne on Iron Man. Some of these are really really great titles and really really great runs that are interesting. And I just did a deep dive recently on Iron Man, the Eddie Granoff run with the team there that did the Extremist comic. That actually led to the birth of the MCU in its form because that caught the eye of filmmakers, and that's what drove them to start to say, I think we can turn this into a full-fledged movie. Some of those runs are legendary. Yeah.
I got to interview Paul Hungerford, just talking with him in general about the history of writers in comics and the various people and the editors and things like that. The other side, like everyone focuses on the art, but it's a team effort when it comes to the creation of these amazing comics. He talked about the multiverse and how that came to be, and it was just really an amazing conversation to have with the vast knowledge that he has as an author and as a writer for the comic scene. So looking at the other side of comics when it comes to, say, maybe lesser known comics or series that you think deserves more attention, what are some of those and why?
I am a big fan of the Micronauts series. Actually, this is a lesser known, maybe not as lesser known, but lesser known type title that is really really interesting and introspective. I really like the biggies mainly because the titles that have been known, out there, X-Men, Spider-Man, the different variants of those are the biggies, right? The little guys that need some love, I think, come from different publishers as well, right? So we have DC and Marvel as the biggies, but stuff from Dark Horse. There's lots of stuff from Valiant Comics that I love, like Bloodshot. These kind of things are slightly lesser known comics, but definitely a worthwhile read. Trying to think of the ones that are tiny but mighty. I think I really loved, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think was a great run. That's Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. I think these, they turn into movies, of course, but I think those comics are actually great comics to read as well.
I like the version of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as that single only movie that has ever played once and will probably never have a sequel whatsoever. I thought it was pretty well done, to be honest.
It's a guilty pleasure movie for sure. I definitely catch it. When it's on TV, I catch it and watch it.
So, what's one storytelling technique from comics that you think could apply to other mediums like film or novels?
That's a very interesting question. I do love the same story told from multiple angles. I know this has obviously been adopted in other mediums. I think it's something that is really telling because the same story told through the perspective of different people, you get that different angle and you get that sort of full-fledged sort of 360 view of what actually occurred in whatever event it was or whatever storyline they're telling because it comes from their own personal perspective. Those are some of my favorite type of stories and storytelling methods that I really enjoy.
I think there was a French indie film I saw a while back. It was rather avant garde for its purpose. Single screen, four different viewpoints, all playing at the same time, all through the lives of these four characters. And you didn't know who to root for until they all came together for some aspect or some concept or whatever they were trying to do for that particular film. But I ended up using that in a couple of short films I created because it was just a rather interesting concept to show time passing from different view perspectives.
That must have been really, really difficult to edit and put together. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Who's a comic artist or writer whose work you admire, and what specific habits or traits do you think makes them exceptional?
I love Denny O'Neil. Going back to the Denny O'Neil I really love his work on Batman at a really pivotal period in the 80s for Batman. Batman was coming out of the 70s where it was a very odd time for the comic and the character itself. You had the 66 show that brought on that lovable goofiness of the character that was followed through in the comics for a period of time. But Denny when he had come on board, he said, no, I'm going to take this rather seriously. I'm going to sort of reset the world, make it very, very brooding and dark, and sort of the Batman that we all know. I think taking an established comic that had been running for 40, 50 years at the time, and saying, okay, I'm stopping the train, I'm changing the track essentially, and we're going to run along this track. That was ballsy to say, for lack of a better word, and I really loved it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of his work. I think that's definitely one that I would outline for sure.
The same thing with the Kingpin reset. He went from that comic character down to the interesting twist when it came to character that you think could just be a B-roll thing. Then he turned to the juggernaut that he is today. No pun intended with that character. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love the whole idea they're doing now with the absolute storylines on DC and the ultimate storylines on Marvel, where they're resetting the universe a little bit. There's that whole background, which is beautiful and lovely, and what I love to dive into of these characters. But it allows new fans to come in and not have to sort of learn this whole background and this whole backstory, and they could start at these beginning moments. And so the absolute storyline has been beautiful in telling those stories and these great, awesome characters, and it's just fun to see. So yeah, I think those are doing really well as well.
The hardest part when it comes to comics, whether it's from a professional scene or whether you're an independent comic creator, it's hard to jump into an already established story. And I think these mini jumping off points where it's a mini reset or maybe it's a complete overhaul of the character is a great way for younger fans or younger readers to get into something maybe they don't understand or know about, and maybe they'll become the next generation of comic creators.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is that I do see a lot of posts on Reddit asking, "Hey, I want to get into Iron Man. Where do I start?" And you'll get 20 different answers, and they're all valid answers, right? They're all good answers. I think it's honestly a great foot in the door, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to not, carry that legacy. The legacy is still there. You can still enjoy it. This is a first of a new entry. It's a character just slightly tweaked with maybe a different backstory, but that backstory starts today. It's day one. So yeah, it's absolutely helpful for people to get into it, and then maybe eventually, or through osmosis, start to learn the history of these characters down the line.
So, how do you think the comic book industry has changed in the last decade, and where do you see it heading in the next 5 years?
Very interesting. So, as we know, single issue comics are struggling. They're not necessarily as selling as high as they used to be. What is happening, of course, is the push towards digital. Before that, it was the push towards trade paperbacks, graphic novels, these types of things. So I would still love to see single issue comics coming out regularly, storylines that need to be followed with patience so you don't get everything at once. That's where still love to see that happening. Things are going digital, but there's ways to tell stories on digital comics that are just as engaging, can be just as good a read as well. And that doesn't stop the artists from creating content that goes digital, right? So whether we get completely paperless when it comes to single issue comics, that would make me sad. Not seeing them on newsstands, not seeing them on spinner racks, as I like to say, would be a little bit sad to see down the line. The digital consumption of media through digital cannot be denied. I think that's going to be where it goes in the future.
Looking at the business side of things, especially with what you just mentioned here, AI is a huge factor when it comes to the creativity process. And I hate using those terms together because it's not creative, it's just stolen artwork. How do you think the publishers are going to handle AI and comic creation when it comes to this mass consumption all over the world?
Yeah, very, very tricky. I do like the fact that AI content is being called out for what it is. And I mention this at the end of every episode. I say AI is useful for a lot of things, but not for replacing art and artists. I do think that there is a place for AI, but not in the creative space. However, there's a niche to that. I don't know how it would be used or regulated, but imagine an AI bot that has been programmed to draw in the style of a specific artist, but only that artist can actually use that AI tool. Meaning, if that artist wants output in his own style, that a bot has been trained to do that. Is that something that, not necessarily a loophole, but is that something that would come to fruition and say, well, this bot is trained to draw in my style, and I'm the person using it? Then we have a method of being able to use the AI in creating comics. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's just an interesting idea. It's a thought experiment. I don't know how I feel about it myself. The current wild, wild west of AI right now is tough, and it's going to be getting even more tough if there's no regulation or some type of ruling regarding that and how that goes forward.
That's actually very interesting. I think that that would be a historical record when it comes to the creation of that particular creator's style. But I mean, we have that with their physical drawing. So, say a creator has a medical issue or something that stops them from drawing, I think that would be another benefit to that particular style if it's only him or her using it.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, then you get into really odd, moral quandaries, right? What if that artist is no longer with us? That bot is still there. Do they just continue to output stuff, drawn in that person's name? Like I said, it's a huge quandary. Who knows? I think some artists might even enjoy that and say, hey, when I'm gone, you could still see stuff that potentially is drawn in my style, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not an artist, so I don't know how I feel about it.
What's a common misconception people have about how comics are made and distributed?
Mhm. Great question. Well, one common misconception, I guess, is, single issue comics are not worth to read because you can just wait for the trade paperback or graphic novel version of that, or wait for the animation or the film, that kind of thing. So it's not about how they're made or consumed, but it's more the value of buying these on a regular basis, of following the storylines, of making sure you buy one, then number two, then number three, and so on and so forth. I still see value in doing that. I think the perceived value of comics, single issue comics, has gone up and down in a negative way. So, we had that peak in the 90s, the comic book crash of mid 90s, where comics were way overvalued. People were treating them as art projects and pieces to own rather than something to consume. I think that is something that I don't particularly enjoy. I don't enjoy people buying slabs. I'm anti-slab unless you have a very very rare old comic that you want to keep preserved. But if you buy a new comic that just came out last year and it's in a slab and you don't want to touch it, are you really enjoying a comic? You're not. You've bought a piece of plastic with some paper inside, and you're not necessarily enjoying that comic. Comics are made to be read. They're not made to be put up and framed without earning that, right? Without earning that history and the value of something that's very old or very very highly valued. I think that comics are made to be read and enjoyed and cracked open. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, just like the library that is free for everyone to consume media. We need more readers when it comes to this type of content, whether it's comics or whatever. And you may find some interest that you didn't realize you had, but just by picking up a colorful book.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You can't read a slab, right?
Just means you have to buy two, right?
Well, yeah, of course.
What's your take on the dominance of Marvel and DC in the mainstream, and how do smaller publishers like Valiant or Dark Horse compete? Maybe add in a publisher, an indie publisher that you've seen recently that has what it takes, I think, to become a professional publisher of the masses.
Yeah, great question. Marvel and DC have been around for so many years, and I think it's because of those back titles and that history that they have that they are currently dominant in the space. There were periods going back into the 40s, at the start of superhero comics, where they were the only players in the space. That's where that sort of dominance comes from, that long history and that huge back catalog. But, ever since the 80s and into the 90s and obviously into the 2000s, there's been a lot of publishers that have come onto the scene, made a lot of noise, and it's rightfully so. The good thing about having sort of two dominant publishers at the top is that the smaller guys at the bottom need to be more creative. They need to drive stories that will push the envelope and push their characters into the mainstream. And so you do get the dark horses and the valiants and those kind of things that, whether they're long lasting or not, they create characters that are interesting because they need to push that. They need to push that creative level just a little bit more to get out there. I'm a huge, huge fan of characters like Hellboy and some of these other characters from other publishers that just takes some really really interesting concepts and amazing art. Like Mike Mignola is just one of my favorite artists and writers. Absolutely love his work. And he took these old folklore stories, he took these old myths, and weaved it into this world he created with Hellboy and the BRPD. And I think it's just really really amazing. So that's what's needed. That's what spurs creativity. So if you have those two massive publishers that are just sort of dominant, the little guys need to be a little more creative. You mentioned some publishers, or if I know of some publishers that are moving the needle, I think of Boom Studios, I think of Dark Horse for sure, of Valiant, those kind of guys. They're labeled second tier maybe, but it's not because of the quality of the content. It's the content is there, the content is good, and you see these things push through. You see these characters push through into the mainstream. They get made into a movie that is no sign of acceptance as far as hitting the fan zeitgeist. But yeah, I mean they make it out there. They make it big enough that studios will be like, maybe this could be a movie. It's debatable whether those movies are good quality or not, but at least the those characters have pushed through.
When choosing which comics to feature on your show, what criteria do you use to decide what's worth diving into?
From my point of view, everything is worth diving into. There's nothing that is not worth diving into, almost to the point where I randomly will pick a comic. If I have no compunction of what I want to talk about or what I feel like talking about, I will just randomly pick out a comic and say, this is the one I'm doing. I started running the channel with comics from my collection, which were obviously from when I was collecting when I was younger, so they're 80s and 90s based comics, I realized I needed to go out and get more comics to add to my diversity. I do buy used comic lots, single issues, random titles. The quality doesn't need to be impeccable. So, anyone out there selling, definitely want to hit me up. And what I like to do is find comics that even characters I didn't know about. So, characters that maybe I've heard of, but I have no idea, did not read them as a child or as a teen, and love to pick them out. I love to pick the single issues because they have those ads in them, the nuances of what storytelling was like whenever those comics were created. So that kind of thing is very, very interesting to me. So I don't necessarily go out of my way. I will try to diversify. So it's like, oh, I did a Marvel last time. I'm going to try and not do a Marvel this time. I've done too many Marvel DC. I'm going to try and look at some of my independents. That might be the only main criteria, but after that, it's sort of like, okay, we're going to do this one. I have no idea what's going to happen, what the story is, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to share. It's always fun because I always learn something new.
Talk us through that creative process here. You find the comic you want. What is your timeline from picking the comic to publishing your final episode? Because I'm always curious about that show notes, and maybe I'll pick up some ways to be more efficient.
So I'm always about a month ahead, and I do a new episode every 2 weeks. So I always have three comics in various stages of being worked on. So three episodes of various stages of being worked on. Essentially, what I do is I pick out a comic. The first thing I do is start to do the research on that comic. I find the names of the creators, and I reach out to them if they're with us still. I reach out to them and I ask, "Hey, do you have any quotes or anything interesting you'd like to share about this specific comic?" While those are coming back to me, if they do, I deep dive research on each individual artist and creator, read the comic through and through a few times, and then I start to gather imagery. I start to gather trivia about the comic. I start to find interesting things that I want to talk about in the comic. Case in point, it's not always trivia about the comic. It could be, the car featured in this episode is this car, and they made this car at this period of time. The gun featured in this episode is whatever, issue is whatever. So I find interesting things to talk about. The writing just sort of starts to build up on itself as I'm working. A story starts to come together. Whatever decade or year the comic was created in or published in, I usually have a little talking point about that, saying, that year comics generated a certain $1 million, or this company was in financial crisis, or this company was just recently purchased, that kind of storyline. And then I dive into the advertisements in the issue. I make sure that I find, information about maybe one or two of the interesting advertisements in the issue. I just cover what is there. And I also talk about advertising in comics in that era, right? So I say comic book ads were really, really focused on film and snacks at this period of time, or going back to older comics, you get, sea monkeys and X-ray glasses and that kind of stuff, which is my favorite era of comics and advertising to read. Get buff, get the Atlas body in 30 days kind of thing. And then I try to identify a comic shop that I want to highlight and point out with some tangible connectivity to that issue. So if that issue is based in Washington, I will find a comic shop in Washington. If a comic shop has advertised in the issue, like in the 70s and 80s, a lot of comic shops will advertise. I try to find one that's still open to this day and give them a shout out. And then I start the recording and editing process, which takes a lot longer. Recording my voice, as you know, it's not always a fun process, but it's part of the job. And then the video editing, right? So everything's on YouTube, so it's highly visual. So that process takes a while, and then it's out the door, and then it's promoting that issue while I'm working on the next one, writing the next one, while I'm deciding what the next one is, and then the process just keeps going.
It's a very time consuming process. Trust me. 16 years of doing interviews. I feel you 100%. I'm with you every step of the way. Once you start getting into interactive elements of video clips or audio or imagery, half the time you're spending scouring the internet if you don't have access to whatever you're trying to find, and making it engaging too. I think that's the most difficult part about keeping an audience's attention, especially this day and age, because everyone's used to the quick 1 minute shorts. No one's going to sit through a 30-minute interview or a 30-minute episode or whatever unless they're actively engaged in what you're doing. And as a host, obviously, it has to be a struggle sometimes. But how do you keep positive when it comes to, sticking with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, there's periods, wax and wanes of interest or energy level. I guess the interest is always there. It's the energy level that can be consuming sometimes. How I stay positive is definitely making sure the work that I do does not sort of drain me in any kind of way. And when I feel that being draining a little bit, I do take a step back and say, okay, today I'm not even going to touch anything. I just need to go outside and touch grass, as they say, or do something that is just absolutely different, so I can reset my mind. Where I see the need to, then I have those moments where I sort of dive in, and 3-4 hours of work has gone by in a microsecond. So I think those kind of realizing when you're feeling a little bit drained, and taking a step back and agreeing with yourself, saying, you know what, today I'm not going to do any of that work. I know it's going to put me maybe a day behind, but it's worthwhile for my mental health. I'm going to focus on something else. I'm gonna get out there and do something else and recharge my batteries. Doing those episodes is time consuming, but I also do daily shorts on YouTube as well, right? And I prepare those well in advance. I'm a couple of weeks ahead of those in advance, but that takes time as well, even though those are 15, 20, 30-second clips. Those take time as well. The other thing I do to try to keep the audience engaged is understanding the analytics of the data that I'm looking at, that YouTube provides, to show me this is where you're seeing drop offs, this is where you're seeing some issues, and adjusting as I go forward. I don't necessarily adjust the content, but I adjust how I present it, how I try to be engaging upfront. I try to make sure that the story has a strong hook, that the messaging has a strong hook, these types of things. So yeah, I think it's important to listen. And actually, a writer came back to me when I asked for an interview, and he said, "Hey, I watched a couple of your videos. I'm a professional writer. Do you mind if I, critique your work?" And I said, "Go for it." And he said, "Sometimes you got to kill your darlings." And what he meant is, I see you have a really strong passion, but you need to make this punchier in this spot. This part, maybe you don't need it, that kind of thing. And I know you wrote it, so it's your darling, but sometimes you do need to kill your darlings and say, okay, I'm cutting this out, I'm moving this around. And I found myself doing that and going back to that thought every time. Okay, I did all the research for this, but I'm just going to delete it because I don't think it's working. I even did the voice recording for it, but I'm taking it out, that kind of thing. So that advice really sticks with me.
And I do the same when I edit my own episodes because I know guests go on multiple trains of thought sometimes. And I know the fact that even when I ask questions, I'm not perfect. I want to get straight and to the point. I want to be clear and concise with the questions. I want you as a guest to be clear and concise with your thought process and your answers. Because I edit for video, but I edit for a podcast. I'm always thinking in my mind, will this translate to audio specifically? As people keep downloading episodes or going back to older episodes, I at least know that the quality is 100% clear. It's 100% there for people to engage in. I love talking the creative side of things with people like yourself because this is a passion. We may not make money on it all the time, or we may make some money on it, whether it's advertising, whatever the case may be, but we're still doing it because we have that creative drive we need to actively engage with our passion and our audience.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned editing these interviews as well. So I hope you can get a 30-second bite out of me, because I do tend to drone on and go in different directions.
You've been great so far. This is wonderful. How do you think the relationship between comic creators and fans will evolve in the age of social media and instant feedback?
That's a great question. When I am researching these artists, I tend to obviously pick up on their socials if they have any. What's interesting is a lot of these artists do have social presence. You can definitely see, depending on the age of the artists, the volume of their social presence. So a lot of the older guys and girls will have, Facebook only, and the younger the artist is, the more social presence they have and the more active they are in their social presence. A lot of them, attend conventions and have signing sessions and have commissions and these types of things. Quite a few of them also have their own websites. They, ask for feedback. They ask for comments and questions and commissions, of course. I think it's a healthy relationship that artists have with their fans. I think they're feeling that level of comfort where if they want to engage more, they will. If they don't want to engage as much, they turn off those social profiles, they delete their accounts, they take steps back to sort of limit that type of interaction. I think that's interesting because, if you go back even just, 30 years ago, where there was no internet, definitely no social presence, the only way you can sort of reach out to an artist might be at a convention, or might be writing those publishers and finding an address to write to a publisher. So there's definitely more opportunity to reach out to your individual artist as a fan, but I think they're feeling pretty much in control of how that interactivity occurs. That being said, I think there is always going to be an inherent wariness for female artists to reach out to fans. Unfortunately, people are the way they are. I do see a bit of a lack of interactivity with female artists. I struggle a little more finding the female artists, their social channels, their websites, and ways to contact them. I think that is on purpose. I think it's just difficult, and it's an unfortunate situation, but I think it's difficult. But yeah, so like I said, it's at their control. I think it's great that they have that ability to, they don't want to engage, they do not, but a lot of them do, and they're quite active on their social profiles.
The toxicity side of comics, unfortunately, bleeds through when it comes to
Yes.
fan interactions. There's a fine line between passion and stalkery.
Yeah.
So I can completely understand. It's unfortunate that that's human nature
Hmm.
of a select few.
Unfortunately. Yeah, unfortunately, there's toxic fandom. It has been around forever. It's just exacerbated with social media because everyone has a megaphone. There are active fan bases out there that try to eliminate that toxicity, and which is great. And there's voices within the comic industry specifically who are like, "Hey, we are a non-toxic fan base. It's, if you're talking about that stuff, you're not in the right place." I love those kind of people. I embrace that as well. I don't really mention it much on my channels, but it is a non-toxic space. It's a friendly place where we're just talking about things that we love. And if you want to be toxic, if you want to, give a thumbs down to everything that's out there, there's other places for you, but not really on my channel. So yeah, I'm definitely one of those type of people.
Same here. I don't interview the people I don't want to, and I interview the people I do, and I find amazing friendships have spawned from that, and it's a very open space and positive space here as well too.
That's great.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Very interesting. I'd have to say my dad, and I always go back to my dad when somebody asks me like, "Oh, who's your hero? Who inspires you?" And my dad is about as far away from comic fandom as you can possibly get. He was a big time outdoorsman. He was in the military. Uh, he was a hunter, fish and game kind of guy, loves all that kind of stuff. He's getting a little older now, God bless him, but still into that sort of that kind of manly man stuff. He can get a fish and cut it open and eat it and all that kind of stuff. And he inspires me because he didn't come from a very family oriented background. He had he had two other brothers, and he had a family that was kind of neglectful of him. So he was the middle brother, and he had to sort of fend for himself. He didn't go to school past, you know, elementary school. They took him out of school to work at the family bakery. So, he had to lift himself up. And when I was born, he went back to school and had two other jobs all at the same time, lifted himself up out of that. And was a great provider for us, my sister and I. And so he is my hero. And so whenever I sort of look at um, who I want to be, and I want to be as hard as a worker as he is, and as much as a provider as he is. And I know this kind of gets as far away as possible from the fun comic stuff that I do, but he is absolutely the one that inspires me the most. So I'd have to say my dad, and then just because he was just and he still is just a hard worker, a go-getter, and really really admire him for that.
From a professional standpoint, you have an amazing YouTube show that everyone should be watching. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Personally successful. No, I don't consider myself personally successful. I think I am one of hundreds of thousands of other YouTubers out there. If I think of my life, I I would say I'm successful as in I have a wonderful wife. and a lovely son who is excelling at everything he tries. So in that sense, I would say I'm successful. But what is success, anyways? I think that's an extremely subjective term, right? Like financially successful or emotionally successful, right? So that's a really sort of deep question to ask. But I would definitely say I'm not necessarily a success on YouTube or anything, but I think at life I feel definitely feel successful.
Good way to answer slash avoid that question.
Yes.
So if the YouTube thing doesn't work out, politics are in your wheelhouse. There you go.
Yes, I found a way to not answer a question. So yes, politics is 100% my next step.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Uh, I take those all as learning opportunities. I know that sounds lame, but it actually is a fact. You take a misstep, you do something that has generated the opposite of what you tried to achieve, or you didn't achieve much out of the hard work that you put into something. Is definitely a learning opportunity. It's hard to stay on that path and remind yourself it's a learning opportunity instead of sulking into inverting into yourself and sort of sulking and sort of sitting there in a cocoon of despair. I think you have to remind yourself that it's a learning opportunity. It's not just one time you say it and then that's your mental projection going forward. You definitely need to keep reminding yourself of that and not beating yourself up over it.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way. And the fact that you have the younger generation with you, with your family, is maybe you're inspiring them down a particular creative path. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
I think by showing their passion. I think you shouldn't be ashamed about the things that you're passionate about. It goes hand in hand with gatekeeping. I think gatekeeping, which is an extremely negative side of fandom. These are my characters. These are my stories. This is my actor who plays this character, or this is my writer. Sort of a negative connotation when you really should be open to sharing your love and passion of whatever it is that you're passionate about, and especially with the younger generation. Your children, your nieces, your nephews, someone that looks up to you. You should be open to sharing that passion and showing them why you find the love and inspiration from it, and never being shying away from it. I think that's how that's how I've done that with my son, and I feel like he is now empowered to do that with the generation that'll come afterwards, and say, son, if you love film and photography and movies, which he does, and which I do as well, share that passion. And just like we were talking about my dad a few minutes ago, who's a big outdoorsman. He did that with me as well, and not that it didn't stick. I do like camping and I do love the outdoors, but not everything that he loved I loved. But at least he shared that with me. At least he took me out and he showed me these things, and he showed me why he loves these things. And so that's what I did with my son, and I hope he does with his children as well.
If your life was a comic book, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Very interesting. So I already know the title. It popped into my head immediately because I call myself this often. And this is not, don't think any deeper than what it is. But I am the least most interesting man in the universe. I like to read comics, listen to music, watch movies. Um, Stay home and and take naps with my dog. So I think that would be the title of my comic, the least most interesting man in the universe. The soundtrack would be completely filled with. That's a good one because I love all types of music. I'm really, really big on music. So the soundtrack would be varied for let's say we do an episode. Let's say this turns into a TV show, and we do an episode. Every episode would have a very unique sounding soundtrack. So like, just take your Spotify and just go on random, and there you go. So that's that's basically it.
Good. Another non-answer. Love it. All right.
Please vote in the next election. Yeah, I'm counting on you.
Yeah, you now hold the record in 16 years for two non-answers in an episode. So congratulations. I say that in jest, but it's all good. I do hate to say this, Michael, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kurt. I would love to be back anytime.
Before I let you go, where can we find you? How can we support you? Where are you online, and anything else you'd like to promote?
Absolutely. You can find me on Read the Freaking Comics on YouTube. I'm also on Blue Sky, on TikTok. I am sort of every social you can find. Just look up Read the Freaking Comics. And if you're in the Seattle area, I am also on radio on the user-friendly segments every Saturday. So I should be on twice right now in Seattle. I don't have the call letters, but I will send those over to you so you can add them in. But I'm there doing segments called Comic Friendly 2.0, where I talk about comics and trivia and answer questions from fans as well. So you can catch me there.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find all of these interviews on our website, tgtmedia.com, but that's going through a revamp. So go to our YouTube channel, because that is definitely always updated, because I'm the only person doing it. youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at twogeekstalking.podbean.com. The Two Geeks Talking is TWO, not the number two. As I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.